Hello and welcome back to Elden Ring and a new tier list video. We're back post 1.07 to cover another topic, this time the boss weapons. Specifically, these are the 17 weapons used from boss remembrances. I originally spoke about these a couple months back, but now with the 1.07 changes, there's been a lot of changes to many weapons, their ashes, as well as even weapon types. So I'm back to review my thoughts and update the list. This is the tier list in any case. We have S down to F. As unlike my other tier list, which compare the best to one another, this is just a full 17 remembrance boss weapons, all of them, and some of them just aren't great, definitely lower tier worthy. With that said though, let's begin. I'm going to try and target the weapons that I brought up or down ratings with the patch changes. To begin with though, let's start with Maliketh's Black Blade, which has gone up from an A rating to an S. In my opinion, the Colossal Sword buffs and nerfs are overall a net positive. It's true that the crouch poke is gone and it was a bit stupidly broken, but now we can actually play these weapons as they're intended, and that's wonderful. Lots of poise damage, heavy hitting attacks, big staggers, proper meaty weapons, and that's how it should be. On top of that, this weapon in particular has two different buffs. We have the Destined Death buff, which means it lasts up to 60 seconds from roughly 15 to 20 from the previous patches, which is a major difference, meaning you can actually stack Destined Death twice a lot easier because it lasts longer, or just benefit from the debuff better. It'll last for the whole duel or invasion fight. A minute is a long time in PvP, as well as, of course, in boss fights, that 10% negative, that's going to last a lot longer. Not to mention, the Ash of War itself with this weapon, it's a lot faster. The motion speed is better. The first whip and slam comes out really quick, and then you have the explosion of the Destined Death. So maintaining that 60-second buff is so easy because of that. It's also incredible for trading in PvP and combos really well off of a basic attack, a running attack, or whatever. And so I find this weapon really good in PvP, very fun, very effective, and one of the top tier Colossal Swords in general, not just a boss weapon. So it's definitely worthy of an S tier grade for me now, and that's why. Also technically improved in this patch in a surprising way is the Blasphemous Blade, which has had its Ash of War slightly improved to give the weapon damage values. So when you slam the blade down and the fire comes out, the blade itself will also deal damage. So if you do it melee range, you can hit with both and do slightly more damage. It was already one of the best weapons of the game, as well as definitely one of the best boss weapons of the game, due to how overloaded it is as a weapon. Lifesteal when you deal damage, lifesteal when you get a killing blow. Killing blow heals even if it's just on your back and you're not even using it. Physical and fire, incredible scaling, a very effective weapon on its own, because in 1.06 they made great swords and two-hand better, but then in power stance it's also an absolute powerhouse. Undeniably one of the best weapons in the game, as well as boss weapons as well. For some reason, they made it slightly better. Here's one they technically nerfed, and yet I am still keeping it an S grade, but perhaps the lowest S grade we're going to talk about. Mohgwyn's Sacred Spear is a great spear, and it's awesome. You have the basic moveset, which is solid for a great spear. I really like them in this patch. In fact, the running heavy is awesome, the poke range is great, the damage is good, and that's improved further when you use the Ash of War. You see, it buffs it up with this Curse Blood, so you got fire and even more bleed damage on the basics, just making its base moveset stronger. However, in patch 1.07, they did target nerf the ritual, the Ash of War on this, to slightly reduce the range at which you deal the damage. Now it's a bit more accurate to the red circle in the sky, so you can see someone doing it and step in or out of it more accurately. But ultimately, if you are within it, you're going to get hit by it, it's going to do a lot of damage and that burst of bleed. So it's still a top tier, great boss weapon in my opinion. Let's move down to the A tier for some other changes this patch, which is probably going to be my most important, biggest change. The Axe of Godfrey was a DRF tier for me originally. Then I bumped it up to a C tier, and now I actually think it's an A tier weapon. I think it's one of the best boss weapons in the game. I can't believe it. It's got mega high AR, which to be fair, it always did, but now it's got better moveset, you know, faster, more effective, which was a major issue for these weapons in general, and now it's better. The Ash suddenly works with the Beast Roar. It was apparently a bug, so the Beast Roar Talisman will enhance the power of the Ash Regal Roar, and now it does just stupendous damage, even if all you're doing is doing the single Regal Roar Ash and spamming that. But of course, it has the follow-up heavy attack once you've got that activated. So now it does a quick stomp and a quick sort of uppercut swing, and that is insane. Super high damage, multi-hit combo, massively staggering, and on top of that, super quick. So you can entirely rely on just that, just spamming that for your PvE scenarios and boss fights, or in PvP for trading. But then you have Regal Roar, which is outrageously damaging now, with big range at that. And the base moveset, it's more effective, it's faster, and again, it's high AR, especially when you're buffed up after doing the Roar, because it works like a Warcry. There are many other ways to make a build work with this weapon if you go into sort of the beast incantations. So, to say the least, I'm blown away. I'm very impressed with this weapon, and I'm very, very happy to see it actually be good, because it's Godfrey's axe, man. It should be good. It's about time. Also shooting up in grades is the Dragon King Cragblade. This weapon was previously a high B, and now I'm putting it towards a low A because there's been a minor change that I do like. They made the Ash of War track better, which is fun. You know, when you're in that cloud form, you get the hyper armor, it deals great damage. The problem is that it's quite avoidable in PvP, and in certain cases in PvE, the enemy would just avoid it or dodge it inadvertently. Now you can turn like a full 180 or even 360, making the tracking much more effective on someone who's jumping around or a target that's a bit hard to hit. As a weapon baseline, it's got a bit of a simplistic moveset, but good damage, and that's backed up with a very strong Ash of War, which is now even better. So that slight improvement from a high B to a low A, I think that's fair. Another weapon that has changed in 1.07 then is Marika's Hammer, which I both love and hate as a weapon, because conceptually it is very cool, and it was buffed in a previous patch to have its Ash of War come out quicker, so very effective. And now in 1.07 they've actually buffed the damage specifically in PvE, so you're absolutely able to completely rely on this Ash. It will hard carry you. The hammer weapon type is just weak as hell. Tiny range, a fun and cool moveset, but with really low poise considering you're using hammers. Simply put, it's not effective. Best used in power stance in my opinion, but if you're really going to make this weapon work, you're basically just only using the Ash of War for your damage. So that's not really that great in PvP, and it's viable as a weapon in PvE, but has that issue. I think it deserves, because of how good the Ash of War is, to be above a C grade, but I'm not going to put it higher than that. What else has been changed in this patch to technically be better? Well, there is a Great Axe, the Winged Greathorn, which I keep at a D grade despite multiple improvements. In 1.07, it benefited from a target buff, where they improved the Ash Soul Stifler by extending the effect time. But in my opinion, it needs more than that. The Ash needs to be bigger to actually have a chance of landing in PvP and be more viable in boss fights. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. It's too obvious, it's easy to avoid, even if it does last longer now. Meanwhile, the base attacks are fine, and technically they were made better in 1.07 for Great Axes, but the damage, the output is just too low. It's not good in either side of the content, even if you do somehow land the Ash. So while it is better than it was, I still rate this a low D. Much like Bastard Stars, yep, it's that time again to talk about it. Flail remains arguably the worst weapon type in the game. As neat as the concept is, it's too short range, it's lacking in damage, posture damage, anything really. Nebula, specifically for Bastard Stars, was buffed, but not in a way that matters. They slightly improved its damage in PvE specifically only, so it remains the same in PvP, which is not viable. In boss fights, its DPS output is slightly better, but I still think this is not enough. Flails need some love in the way other weapon types have had. The flail remains a gimmick and ignored, and I would love to see them do some kind of improvements to it, maybe in time for the DLC. But for now, this is still my worst boss weapon. Now we have some of the major changes in 1.07. Let's work our way up from the bottom, starting with the Grafted Dragon here, which has no changes in 1.07 and still rated a D to me. Ultimately, it's a fist weapon, meaning tiny range and lacking power behind it. Nothing special like bleed or something like that. The reason it's not an F rating though comes down to the Ash of War, bear witness, which shoots all that fire up into the sky. Neat in PvE because it can stagger bosses, and you can do that over and over, making it technically viable. But that's relying on a gimmick to make it work. It certainly doesn't stand up on its own as a weapon. It is not strong. It is just technically usable. So yeah, D rating. Up from that, we have another sadly ignored weapon. The Giant's Red Braid has had no changes of relevance. It's a fun faith whip with fire damage, which is always good. The Ash of War holds you in place too much, as good as its range is. I love if you could roll out of that like many Ashes of War. That's an improvement it should see, but it just doesn't compete with, say, bleed whips. But thanks to its fire and physical damage and great range and fun moveset, I reckon it's above the D grades we spoke about, and that's why I keep it as a C. Just like Lion's Great Bow, which is again the only ranged weapon on this list. Also, with no changes in any relevant patches recently, it just remains a good ranged output machine. You can spam the Ash of War, especially against big targets, and do pretty good damage. Of course, it being a great bow like this, you're held in place when using it, so it's certainly not viable in duels, maybe in open world combat and invasions, but otherwise, it's just a fine bow, which is kind of disappointing considering it's Radahn's bow. For now though, C grade seems fair. Here's one that I would like to see be a bit better, but I do rate it pretty well. It's the Axe of Godric. Improved back in 1.06, I brought it up to a C rating and I keep it there now. It's got an interesting and effective moveset. The basics of the weapon is solid. The Ash has the feint and cancel like I've talked about, so when you're using it, you can roll out of it, but it doesn't do massive damage. It's just a useful tool in AoE or PvP to catch people out with the range that it has. I enjoy using it, even though it's certainly not the strongest weapon, but it's certainly viable if you like the weapon, and I do. But compared to Godfrey's axe, it doesn't really compete because it doesn't have the same levels of output. Alright, 5 weapons remain. Let's jump up. A lot of them are going to be in A grade, interestingly, starting here with Morgott's Cursed Sword, which in 1.06 and 1.04 saw multiple buffs. The curved greatsword moveset improved, the Ash of War, how fast it comes out, the motion values of that, much improved, making it a viable arcane bleed weapon, but it also comes with the Cursed Blood aspect, meaning it's got that explosive effect, the fire and the bleed. You jump forward, you strike, there's a pop, and then you can combo it a second time for another strike and another pop, making it kind of an absolute beast when it comes to trading in PvP. And in PvE, you can just blindly spam that, get loads of staggers, do really well, get bleeds, and it's been made better in two-hand on its own, so you don't need to rely on power stance with a weapon like this anymore. It is much better than it once was, and that's why I brought it up from a B rating to an A grade, but I think, you know, considering there's not been any changes in this patch, it'll just stay there. Much like the Sacred Relic Sword, although that has seen some improvements in previous patches where two-handing a great sword and its moveset is better, and as cool as this weapon is, especially with that golden glow and the massive Ash of War, it doesn't have too much going for it in terms of threat. The Ash of War is the ultimate rune farming technique and tool, and in PvP, in invasions, it can be fun, but in duels, it's so easy to avoid this wave of gold, this Ash of War, by just rolling through it because it comes out kind of slow. It's a tough one because if you do improve that Ash of War to be more viable and more likely to hit, it might reach broken levels very quickly. It certainly has its place, and where it has its place, it's very effective. So A grade for sure. Is one that I struggled to keep in A grade, but I think I just have to. Malenia's katana, the Hand of Malenia, is basically an okay katana. If this video was comparing the katanas to one another, it wouldn't rate massively high. It is essentially the Nagakiba, but worse. Kind of the same range, but worse scaling and output. But when we look at it as a boss weapon compared to other Remembrance weapons, it is a long-range katana moveset with bleed as part of its kit, which is obviously very strong, and then it has the Waterfowl Dance, which, if you get successive talismans and buffs and so on, the AR can skyrocket. If you're able to land this combo on a boss or an enemy or group of enemies, you absolutely steamroll them. And in PvP as well, as hard as it is to land that Ash of War, if it does land, it's going to kill the person it hits. Also, it's really, really cool. Lastly, for A grade then, it is of course the Star Scourge Greatswords, the 2-in-1 weapon, the weapons of Radahn. They're awesome, they've been good from the start, and now they're slightly better with colossal weapon buffs. But it never really relied on the things that the other ones did, such as the crouch poke. It never had that. Because it's 2-in-1, you're forced to have a very simplistic moveset, basically only having one button for all of your attacks other than your Ash of War. The Ash of War, Starcaller Scream, is obviously effective, pulling people in, doing that massive slam, looks cool as hell. Now with the posture changes in 1.07, we can stagger enemies very effective with this weapon, and we already could beforehand, so it's just better. So it's sort of this passive slight improvement, but very, very minor. It would be cool if there was some more uniqueness to the moveset, specifically with this weapon, but it is still very viable and solid as a weapon and remains good, so I think A tier or maybe lower A tier seems fair. Alright, last but not least, we have our last weapon, and there's not too much to say about this one. It's the Carian Regal Scepter, the only int staff staff on this weapon and considered the second best int staff in the game, considering its great scaling and the fact that it improves your moon sorceries. There's only one that's technically better, which makes your spells cost more FP but improves the power of them, but there are many builds where you don't want things to cost more FP. Therefore, this is the best pick in that case. Also, it looks cool, and also it comes with that funny spinning Ash of War. But there you have it, that is our complete patch 1.07 boss remembrance weapons tier list, all 17 in order, left to right, left being the one that I rate the highest in each individual tier. As we compare to the old tier list, you can see that there's been some serious changes, some weapons really shooting up like Godfrey's Axe, and I'm really happy to see these meta-changing buffs and nerfs that have been going on in the recent patches. It's really nice to see From Software support the game and actively change what's going on with the active player base. How will things change in the DLC? I'm not sure, but I'm sure we'll have more boss weapons to look at and compare in the future. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.